Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome again. Just a brief overview as we get started about what is the Autism Society of Minnesota, because I know these new workshops are bringing in a lot of new people. Um, the Autism Society of Minnesota was established in 1971, and we have a very, very simple mission. We exist to enhance the lives of individuals and families affected by autism. And we do this in a number of ways. We advocate for legislation and policies to see improved services, increased outcome opportunities, and greater self-determination. We educate. I like to tell people we will train literally anyone that wants to be trained. We've trained everyone from your local Boy Scout troop to state legislators. We're here to support individuals and families through quality programs, counseling services, and resource and information services. We're here to collaborate with organizations and individuals who share our commitment to enhancing the lives of those affected by autism. And this can be everyone from your local church to your hospital to individuals up at the state capitol. And then, of course, to build community and provide a welcoming and accessible environment for autistic people to connect and form our own community and our own social bonds. We do this in a lot of different ways. I'm going to go through this super quick because this is not what we're here to learn about tonight. We have training and consultation. We have social skills programming, summer camps, therapy and support groups. We do big events like conferences and our community summit. We have an information resource hotline that's available every day that we're open. And of course, our advocacy up at the state capitol and on the federal level and city levels as well. So a little bit about myself, and it's a very little bit. I'm Jillian Nelson. I'm the policy director here at the Autism Society of Minnesota. My job is to know what all the laws say and what all the resources are. I'm also an autistic adult, so most of these things I've learned not just because I read a law somewhere, but because these are my rights too. And as a policy nerd, I really, really like to understand my rights. And I'll be honest, sometimes I like to argue about my rights when they're not being protected. So today's objectives, we're going to understand the general legal rights afforded to people with disabilities, understand how to access these rights, and know who we would contact in case of a rights violation. So diving right in, the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is one of the big ones. This was passed in 1990, and this is a federal civil rights law. It was set up to protect people with disabilities in public life. There's the key areas of this are employment, public services, public accommodations, telecommunications, and then miscellaneous. A couple key things to remember here is the ADA does protect people with disabilities against discrimination in employment, but in order for that law to be in effect, the person with the disability does have to disclose their disability to the employer if it is not a visible disability. So obviously, someone in a wheelchair does not have to go to HR and say, I would like it documented that I'm in a wheelchair. But especially talking about things like autism, it is important that those things are documented and it is formally disclosed if you want to be able to access protective rights. Because when it comes to proving discrimination, it can be very hard. So it needs to be really black and white that the employer was aware that the person had a disability. Public services. These are any services that are provided by public entities. So things like our Medicaid programs, some places, public education, different community ed programs, all of those sort of things are things that are protected under ADA as having to be accessible for all people. Public accommodations is the next one. So these are buildings that are public. So like Target or our courthouse or the Autism Society of Minnesota. There are some buildings that are grandfathered in, meaning that they were older and considered to have historical significance, so they do not have to comply with the public accessibility laws. Um, but we're seeing less and less and less of those now. Telecommunications, there's guidance here related to telecommunications. So things like TV shows, public television, news shows, like TV, all public stations are now required to provide things like closed captioning. And that is part of the ADA. And then miscellaneous is just all the other nuts and bolts that go into accommodation laws, such as how many parking spots a business has to have, or what percentage of a public venue has to be accessible seating. It's really important to recognize, though, that the ADA is just ground level accessibility, and it doesn't necessarily have a lot of guidance into it regarding things like invisible disabilities. There's a ton of guidance regarding physical accessibility, like how wide a ramp has to be, how wide a doorway has to be, what an accessible bathroom has to look like, but there's not a lot of stuff on invisible disabilities. There is a question. What are some examples of buildings that would be grandfathered and don't have to meet ADA requirements? It's typically buildings built after or before a certain date that are considered to have historical significance and have not had any type of architectural work done on them since. So, like, let's say there's a building in Minnesota that was built in 1930s and it was considered to have historical significance, and they decided to retrofit the building to become an office building. At the point in that they decide to retrofit that building, it now has to become ADA compliant. But if there's no work done changing the building between the time that it was grandfathered and now, then the building can continue to be inaccessible because it has not had work done on it. Does that make sense, Becca?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Perfect. Um, you have another slide on the ADA. Now, where the ADA really starts to protect the autism community is in the sentence, other reasonable accommodations as requested. Because there is not clear, concise definitions to what accessibility looks like for invisible disabilities or intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities, this is where people are protected by reasonable accommodations. So a definition of a reasonable accommodation is a change or adjustment that allow a person with a disability equal opportunity. Some examples that we might see are things like adjusted work schedules, interpreters, assistive technology, accessible facilities, service animals, being able to bring a PCA with, all of those things. Now, the key point here, and this is where it gets a little hard in our community, they must not cause undue hardship, meaning that it cannot alter the state of business that a place does or alter or fundamentally alter the services provided or cost an unreasonable amount of money. And unfortunately, there's not really a definition of what that undue financial hardship means. It's a very gray area. And one of the most common things that we do see with the ADA and invisible disabilities is requesting accommodations in a public access space, and then the place being like, well, we're ADA compliant, so we're already doing that. And they're ADA compliant because they have their ramps, their handrails, and their bathrooms, but they forget or are not trained as lower level employees to understand that the ADA also consumes other reasonable accommodations as requested. So with um, with this, it is supposed to be an interactive process where both sides can say, these are the accommodations I request. And the other side can counter and say, well, these are the accommodations we can provide, and it's supposed to be met together. Um, the ADA is protected with the ADA. It's also protected under Section 504 and as well as the Minnesota Human Rights Act. So those are all places where we have the same rights. So we kind of have the same rights in a number of different places. In case of it not being, I forgot to put that in the slide. In cases of the ADA not being followed through, you can file with any of the ADA departments. Here in Minnesota, we have the Great Lakes ADA that's housed at Metropolitan Center for Independent Living. Most ADA complaints can also go through the Minnesota Human Rights Department because they're also a violation of the Minnesota Human Rights Act. Any other questions about the ADA before I go on to the next law and set of rights? Okie dokie. We're going to talk about IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is the law that exists to ensure that students with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education. That right there is one of the big nuances in this, is that education rights are not guaranteed to students outside of public education. So if you were to choose to enroll a student with disabilities in a private school, they are not required to provide any type of accommodation. A lot of them will because it's the right thing to do, but they are not required to. They don't have to follow an IEP. They don't have to use least restrictive environment. They don't have to include parents, and they don't have to provide transition services. Some of the those are all the really fundamentally key points. Once a student is identified as having a disability and requiring individualized education assistance, they need to have either an IEP, which means that they require specialized instruction. And that IEP has to have goals and explain what the school is legally obligated to provide to that student based on their learning needs, or a 504, which would be their accommodations to access the school. They are required to provide education in the least restrictive environment. In this case, in education, the goal is to have students in as much mainstream education as possible. Students cannot be segregated into a special education setting without justification for their learning goals. Parents have a lot of rights under IDEA, meaning that they have to sign off and approve all plans that go into effect for that individualized education program. And then under IDEA, students also have right to what's called transition services, which is an extra few years after high school, after grade 12, to provide services and education, basically how to adult, how to interact in the community, independent living type things. The federal law requires transition services up to the age of 21, but Minnesota has expanded that law up to the age of 22. If any of these rights were violated, they would be enforced through a process with the Department of Education. Do we have any questions about IDEA or IDEA? Okay, we'll keep going. We're going to talk about the Air Carrier Access Act. This one protects air travelers with disabilities. This one was passed to ensure that all people with disabilities have the same access to airplanes and any type of air travel. Some of the key rights are assistance in boarding and deplaning. What a lot of people don't realize, this includes wheelchairs at the airport. So if you need assistance getting to the gate, this is sometimes really, really helpful for um, families with individuals that might move a little bit slower or become a little bit more overwhelmed moving through crowds. Using a wheelchair service can be really helpful. It protects the ability to bring mobility aids and service animals onto an airplane, and they cannot refuse service based on a disability. So theoretically, they cannot say that a family with a child with autism cannot fly on the airplane. Now, where there is a slight gray area here is if there is something happening after the family boards the airplane that the pilot or the airline attendants feel would prevent the airplane from safely flying and transporting, and that it would cause a safety hazard to the other passengers, then a family can be asked to deplane. I have very, very rarely seen it upheld, though. Usually the U.S. Department of Transportation typically will have the back on say, this wasn't an okay situation, and airlines will rebook families to fly out at a later time. Um, I've also discovered like this is kind of one of those situations where if you're very vocal about knowing your rights, a lot of times less severe consequences can happen in those moments. I do recognize that there's a level of privilege that goes into that. And different people with different levels of privilege might experience that interaction differently. Um, but I would typically recommend documenting anyone that you talk to in case of discrimination in air travel, and advising individuals that you understand your rights, that you cannot be refused service based on disability, asking for specific reasons you're being asked to deplane, and asking for the airline information and the U.S. Department of Transportation information to file an Air Carrier Access Act complaint. A lot of times they're a lot more cooperative once they realize that this isn't just going to be a matter of removing you from the plane and that this is going to become a much larger legal matter. Do we have any questions about the Air Carrier Access Act? Okie dokie. The Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act is a law that prohibits housing discrimination based on disability. Some of the rights you have under fair housing are equal opportunity to rent, buy, or live in a place, the same as anyone else. You have the right to reasonable accommodations and modifications. This one is one that people really miss a lot and that landlords often forget is part of the Fair Housing Act. I really push this one and referencing the Fair Housing Act when asking for any type of accommodations or modifications. Um, this does, however, fall under the same rules as the ADA, that it has to be a reasonable accommodation. It can't fundamentally alter the structure of the party without the permission of the cannot fundamentally alter the structure of the property without permission from the landlord or the landlord's participation. Some landlords, if it is a cost prohibitive modification, they are not required to pay for it. They do need to allow it if it doesn't harm the structural integrity of the building, but just recognize that like those modifications may not be something that you're able to take with you if you move or something that the landlord would be required to reimburse you for. There is also protection from harassment or retaliation. This one's a little bit hard to enforce too. One of the most common things I see in rental properties and families with autism is neighbors complaining because sometimes autistic kids have a lot of energy and they like to bounce and crash and run, and that can be really annoying if you live underneath them and you're not a very understanding person. So we've seen issues with neighbors filing noise complaints and then leases not being renewed. And like I always like to remind them of these things, asking landlords what kind of accommodations they're willing to make to help the family, so that there aren't continued noise complaints. Um, document everything. And making sure that there's not other reasons that the landlord could use to choose to non-renew or to evict. Like if you are someone who is getting a lot of noise complaints because of an uncaring and uncompassionate neighbor, and at the same time you're significantly behind on rent, the landlord may be able to use that rent piece to avoid having proof of harassment or retaliation because of the other neighbor. This is something that is enforced by both the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. They have a complaint process through that, and also through the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. Any questions about those? You guys are so quiet tonight.
Hey, Jillian. This is
Yeah.
Teresa. So what's the best way to get help if you want help communicating with your landlord about accommodations?
Um, God, I can't remember. There is a renters right group. If you search tenant advocacy, it comes right up. I can't
Yeah,
remember their name right now. That's who I usually refer people to. This is one of
um,
those where they know the Fair Housing Act significantly enough that it doesn't necessarily need to be a disability specific organization advocating because of that.
yeah, yeah. I think I contacted them about something like a regular non-disability issue, and they helped me with that. And then I think I asked them about I have some sensory issues I've been trying to deal with my apartment complex that hasn't been very helpful. And I thought I remembered them telling me that I should contact a disability lawyer for that, but that was a while ago, so I
I mean,
might be
it's possible.
misremembering.
I mean, I would also put any requests for accommodations for sensory related things. I would put them in writing. I like to use statements
Yep.
like, under the Fair Housing Act, I'm requesting a reasonable accommodation due to disability related issues. The accommodation I am requesting is this. I'm happy to provide additional documentation as requested. But once you say under the Fair Housing Act, I am requesting a reasonable accommodation, again, that's a good indication to people that you know your rights. And usually
Yeah.
you recognize that you know your rights. Those are the words under the Fair Housing Act, I am requesting,
Yeah.
are words that people in the rental industry are taught to be very concerned about immediately. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I've done it all via email, and I've used reasonable accommodations, but I haven't done the really official language yet.
yeah, I mean, you can also, my favorite is to stack all the languages like under the Fair Housing
Yeah.
Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Minnesota Human Rights Act. I am requesting these following accommodations. So,
Yeah. I
I
was
like to
hoping they
stack them all
would
together.
I was hoping they would be good and reasonable, but I think I'm gonna have to go into that level of things.
I mean, this is kind of like the ADA that we were talking about, where a lot of times,
Yeah.
when it comes to things like Fair Housing Act or the ADA, people don't necessarily realize like I
Yeah.
don't ever think it's that people are intentionally trying to be unkind to people with disabilities. In my eye, it's usually
Yeah.
that people do not understand the nuanced levels of what these acts do beyond the basic things that they're taught. Like they're taught and they go
Oh
through
yeah.
training to understand that fair housing prohibits discrimination based on disability. And if you're someone who's never been exposed to the disability
Hmm.
community, you see that as okay, I can't not rent
Wheelchairs
because
and
they have a disability.
yeah.
You don't necessarily realize that that also protects a person's right to have reasonable accommodations or modifications, that it protects their right to from harassment and retaliation, because those aren't necessarily the sort of things that they train like leasing agents to deal with. And most of
Yep.
the time when you're calling the office of an apartment complex, who you're dealing with is the leasing agent. Another thing that I often recommend to talk to people is instead of going to a leasing agent or the person in the front office, either speak directly with your assistant manager or your maintenance manager. Maintenance managers know
Mm,
more about physical accommodations to properties because they're the people doing them.
yeah.
If it's something
Yeah, I
that,
don't think we have that.
yeah. So, I mean, most properties do, even if you don't know. It's the person that drives around fixing things. Sometimes it'll be a shared thing, but usually there's someone around.
Yeah, I think at my complex, they're run by a really big management company that runs lots and lots of properties, like around the country, I think. And the
Oh,
people in the office have very little authority to do things, it seems like. So,
they
and
will,
they keep changing and don't seem to know what they're doing, which doesn't help.
yeah. But if they're a large company, they absolutely have a
Yeah.
maintenance team. Um,
Yeah, there's a maintenance team. We don't have information about. We just call the same phone number for everything, whether it's maintenance or
I mean, honestly, that's
stuff.
when I
So,
go rogue and I just look for the guys because usually the maintenance guys are running around larger properties on golf carts. So I would just
yeah,
watch for the golf carts, flag someone down on a golf cart and be like, hey, I have some questions about some modifications. Can you tell me who the supervisor is here? And if it's the supervisor, he'll just tell you. If it's not the supervisor, they're absolutely going to tell you because they probably
they
don't
don't want their
have to deal with the
yeah,
complicated stuff. I
yeah,
know, I know a surprising lot about apartment management. My ex-husband
yeah.
was a maintenance supervisor for
Oh, yeah,
me. So I know a lot.
yeah. Yeah, the main issue that I've talked to them about that has really surprised me that they haven't done what I've asked is they have those stupid air fresheners all over the place, and some of them make me nauseous. And I've
Yeah.
asked them to, just turn it off by me. And they're like, "Oh, we could turn it down." Like, yeah, no. So
Yeah,
tried to
that's
ask nicely and it's not going anywhere. So
I mean, yeah, I'd put it in writing and request it as an accommodation under the Fair Housing Act and ADA.
yeah. Yeah, I have a few other things I want to go over with. So I'm probably going to try and get some legal advice so that I can have a nice letter that uh, gets my point across without going into too much detail, because that's the problem I have if I go on my own is I get too detailed.
Yeah, I understand that one.
Oh yeah.
Do we have any other
I
Fair Housing Act questions or any
think
other previous rights I've gone over? Okay, we will keep going. Um, disability services rights. Oh, wrong way. Sorry, guys, I can't see all my whole screen because Zoom. Disability service rights. So these are the rights that apply to individuals receiving services and supports through any DHS program. What the law says is that individuals receiving any type of DHS program, so we're looking at waivers, we're looking at medical assistance, anything like that. Um, and you had 245D setting. The rights include the right to dignity and respect, choice and self-determination, privacy and confidentiality, freedom from abuse or neglect, and the right to complain or appeal without retaliation. There's a couple different levels of enforcement with these ones. DHS appeals is the first one. Any decision that comes from Medicaid or DHS or a case manager, all of those things can be appealed. You have 30 days to file an appeal and go in front of a judge and basically explain why you think the wrong decision was made. Um, the Ombudsman for Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities is another place that you can escalate something if DHS is not responding in a way that is productive. The Ombudsman is especially helpful when we're looking at situations regarding abuse or neglect. That's where they'll really, really get involved. They're less so over things like your budget's changed or whatnot. That takes a little bit longer. Um, and that's usually something to go through with a budget. Um, there's a lot of rights that people have that they don't necessarily realize, like within those things like choice and self-determination. We have the rights at any point to say, I'm not okay with the person who's handling my case. I would like a new case manager. Sometimes you'll get pushed back. I like to remind them that it's my right under the DHS laws that they have to allow me to have a new case manager. It's not a suggestion I was offering. Um, and then the right to complain or appeal without retaliation. Um, do we have any questions? I'm sure we have. I would surprise me if you guys don't have any questions about disability service rights.
Yeah, I have questions about that. Does the case manager thing, would that apply to the the county financial person that was assigned to me? She's been extremely unhelpful.
Yeah, it applies to them. Their ability to help is very limited.
Yeah. They basically tell me to talk to Disability Hub. That's like all the help I've gotten from
Yeah,
them.
so financial workers at the county level, the only thing they can really help with is whether or not you financially qualify for a program. Like they have no ability to determine what program you would qualify for, where to find help. They are not case managers. They are just the people that process the paperwork at the county level and determine whether or not you continue to qualify.
Yeah, I've been trying to get my MAEP. Well, originally I was trying to get my MAEPD renewed. Um, and she just referred me to Disability Hub. That's all she would do. Um, and then I finally got got my paperwork through for the MAEPD, and after multiple times being approved, I was denied this time. So
Int-
I lost my MAEPD, and I don't know why.
was it
And when
was
I
it through
lost
the
my
SMART process or just the MAPD process?
oh, I had to get re-smirted for to be because I work. So I had to be it was the
Yeah.
smirt that I got denied because I'd been smirted for years.
I would appeal it. But
Yeah.
you get appealing it to like the DHS has to make their case. One thing I do is I very like 9 times out of 10, if your smart's being denied, it's because the doctor's office hasn't sent their paperwork back. Because they have you fill out all those release of information forms and then they
Hmm.
contact. I no longer
Yeah.
do that with mine. I have all of my medical records needed for SMART. Like I on
Yeah, I
a
read something about that the other day.
Yeah, on a yearly basis, I request copies of my medical records that will apply to my smart case. And I keep them in PDF files on my computer so that when it's time
Right.
for that smart thing to happen, I fill out all the forms, I call smart and say, hey, I have all my medical records, where can I email them? And then I send them, and it not only works every time, it also actually streamlines the whole process and goes a lot faster. So if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
capable of doing the
Yeah, it
work,
took forever this time. They're so behind.
yeah, if you are capable of they don't have the time to follow up with doctors' offices and request a second time. So if you are capable of doing the footwork and getting all the medical records, like I take the last 2 weeks of the year off every year, and that's when I do it. But
Mm,
clockwork, I just that last week of the year I call and I
yeah.
for PDFs. So
Yeah. Yeah, because when I lost well, of course, I was one of the people who wasn't told that my SMRT expired during COVID. So I like at the last minute found out that I was going to lose my MAEPD because of that, and they hadn't told me. And then my issue with paperwork is I can fill it out. I just have trouble keeping up with it and getting it in on time.
yeah.
And my arms worker has been my big help with doing that. But I lost my MEPD, so I lost my arms worker. So I was going to try to appeal, and of course, I didn't get the paperwork done within the deadline. So yeah,
Yeah, I would just apply
that's been
again and get collect all your paperwork ahead of time.
okay. Yeah, maybe I'll try doing that.
That is my usual recommendation on that.
All right. Thanks, Jillian.
Any other questions? I was expecting so many more questions, y'all. We might not make it to 8:30. The Minnesota Human Rights Act. This is where we get really, really lucky. The Minnesota Human Rights Act actually it is actually stronger than the Federal Human Rights Act, and it is stronger than the ADA. This is the Minnesota state law that protects against discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodations, etc. Disability is covered, and it specifically names physical, sensory, mental, or health related. The enforcement here is the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, and there are also time limits for filing. It's usually about 1 year. I will be completely transparent with all of you. The Minnesota human rights complaint process is wildly inaccessible. I can handle many, many inaccessible systems. This is one that I've never been able to successfully get through because it is so complicated. It's a lot of back and forth. You file a complaint, you have to convince them your complaint is valid and worth pursuing. Then once you do that, then they send the complaint to the company you're complaining about, then they get to file a reply, and then there's a step after that that I have yet to figure out what it is and what to do. So ask a lot of questions. I don't have an easy answer on this one. Do we have any questions about it though? Okay. The Minnesota Olmstead rights, these are based on the Olmstead versus LC Supreme Court decision in 1999. There were two women basically that lived in an institution and they decided they didn't want to live in an institution and they wanted to live together in the community. So they sued for that right. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court affirmed that people with disabilities have the right to live, work, and receive services in the most integrated setting possible. So we have a plan, and our plan is redone every few years. It's our state's commitment to ensuring that people with disabilities can live in their own homes or communities, that they can work in competitive integrated jobs, and they can participate fully in the community life. Any violations of these can go to the Olmstead Implementation Office. This year, I'm very, very excited to say that they're working on the plan for that has to be put out next year. And after many, many years of me complaining that the plan was exclusionary and only looked at certain types of people with disabilities, this year they worked very, very hard to do a lot of outreach to the autism community, especially individuals that are living more independently in the community with supports. So I'm super excited about that, and hopefully we'll see a plan that is more inclusive this coming year. Any questions about Olmsted? Okie doke. So how do you advocate for your rights? Know your protections. Um, I've noticed if I drop names, if I say things like, excellent, we can have this conversation. If you're not able to support me, I'm going to follow up with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. It lets them know that I'm not just randomly complaining and that I mean business. Document issues, communications. I keep a log of all contact. Whenever possible, keep communications in writing. Because then it doesn't become a he said, she said, like you have that documentation that this is what happened. Speak up. So many people are like, well, I don't know if that violated my rights. What do I do? Truly, your voice really, really does matter. So don't be afraid to use it. And that is all I have. I genuinely expected a whole lot more questions on a whole lot more things, and that we would have a lot more than 40 minutes of content. Does anybody have questions or things that they want to know more about? I'm happy to answer them.
Hey, Jillian. Teresa again. So do you know anything about like one of the things when I tried to find out why my SMRT got denied, the lady I talked to said that they have very specific, very limited um, criteria that they're supposed to use, and that it's not really designed for people in my circumstances where I can work, but um, not like 100%, where I need like partial assistance. Um, because that's the biggest reason that I need the MAEPD is I can't get health insurance through my job. Um, but I have multiple medical conditions, so I absolutely need health insurance so I can get my, insulin and whatnot. And she basically said that um, that MAEPD isn't meant for that. And I thought that was exactly what it was meant for people in my circumstances. So I thought I
Um,
was confused.
yes and no. So MAPD is designed not necessarily to give access to health insurance, but to give access to disability services for people that wouldn't otherwise qualify for MA.
Huh.
Um, so like things like PCA care, housing support. So there is certain criteria and certain levels, like a diagnosis itself isn't enough to qualify
Hmm.
for MAPD. There has to be a diagnosis with documentation of support needed. So, like, it is entirely possible to put five people with autism through the SMART process and three out of
Right.
five to come out approved because it's not technically based on diagnosis, it's based on support need level. So like
Huh.
really like making sure that like the medical documentation like from like therapists or medical doctors indicate
Right.
that there needs to be support in handling different portions of your disability.
Okay. Well, so then if you make too much money to get on regular medical assistance and you can't get health insurance from your employer, you're just left with Minnesota Care and
Yeah,
the marketplace.
yeah.
Oh my God. I can't afford the marketplace insurances. I mean, I can barely afford what they are now. And for next year, I really don't know that I'm going to be able to afford health insurance.
Yeah, this is kind of one of those things that we're consistently working on. Um,
Wow.
the reality is that most people with the autism should qualify. Um, when we look accurately at things, a lot of times we don't necessarily, we're not always our best reporters, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like if support needs are accurately identified by providers, most people with autism would qualify. Um, but it's kind of that basis where it has to not just be accurately identified by the provider, but also accurately reported by the person with autism. And this is where we get into the challenges. So,
Yeah. All right. So
I
us
mean, I
in-betweeners
would
are just out of luck unless we get,
or spend some
yeah.
time like really looking at the qualifications for MA and then doing a really deep dive search because most of us like and this is where we really have to start identifying what is adaptive behavior and what is maladaptive behavior because a lot of us do get by. Like I got by for years without MAPD, but that wasn't because I was functioning at the level I should have been
Mm,
functioning at. It was because
right.
I learned to
Yeah.
maladaptive behavior. Once we identified that maladaptive
Yeah.
behavior, and I chose to not live with maladaptive behavior and figure out how to have support and report those things, I qualify.
Yeah.
So, really kind of looking at it takes some some deep dive looking and having to realize deficits that we don't always necessarily want to admit or embrace.
Yeah. I sent in like a 12-page report listing all of my stuff, but apparently I didn't do it the right way.
It has to be
Um,
documented in medical documentation as well.
yeah. Yeah, that was the thing I found out for the first time this year is that they actually told me that they don't really look at what I say. They look at the medical stuff. So I'm like, well then I've wasted months. I mean, literally it takes me months to fill out the paperwork for MAPD. So where can I find the MA eligibility or what the criteria are?
Mm.
Could I throw something out quick? I'm also on MAPD, and I had to go through my whole medical record and find all the areas that they were like the places of inaccuracy and formally request that my doctors correct them before sending all the paperwork in because, like, so much what Jillian was saying, they hadn't really accurately documented it. So, like, I have really severe asthma and they had it on file as mild asthma, and that's like one of the things I qualify under.
Yeah,
So I know for me that was something that, like, making sure that I knew exactly what it said in those records and that it was actually true, like they got it right, and letting them know like why it's really important that I have the right thing on file. So,
I cannot figure out which document is the right document right now, but here is the link to all the SMART document that will tell you somewhere in there what the criteria is.
okay, cool, thanks.
But yeah, it really is
Um,
all the medical stuff. And honestly, that's part of the reason I gather my own medical records is so that I know exactly what
yeah.
I'm submitting the right things.
Yeah, and see, there's not as far as the autism goes, there's other than saying that I have autism, I don't think there's anything in my medical records about that. Um, the notes from my therapist and my arms worker have plenty to say about my executive function and
Oh, well, your
whatnot,
therapist
but
notes should be something that you're using then. That's what
yeah,
I
I do. Yeah, I listed my arms worker and my therapist and my psychiatrist.
So a lot of times those
and
providers are a
my
little bit
medical doctor.
hesitant to send over as much information as they really need to provide to get us approved. So again, it's why I collect it because then I know
Yeah.
exactly what I have in front of me, and if it's not what I need, I go hunting and say, so this is great, but I also need all of my notes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
I
that
was,
one's
I
a little
was
bit
just
off
so
putting, like
surprised.
reading my notes to make sure they have what they have. Like, oh, I just relived 4 years of therapy in an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my therapist had her first life was as a special ed teacher, and she was an English major, so she's really good at writing letters and
Well,
saying things well. But yeah, I was just so surprised that I was approved for MA multiple times and or for MA EPD or SMRTed, get my acronyms right. I was
yeah.
just so surprised I was SMRTed for years, and then all of a sudden I didn't lose any diagnoses, but if anything, I gained them. And yeah, so all right,
Yeah, we have to
I'll
take
check
a
that link and
recent
see
record. Like the
if that
document
helps.
was there before. So, any other
All
questions,
right,
friends?
thanks.
Well, if we don't have any other questions tonight, we'll call it a night. And I thank you all for joining us and spending time with us tonight.